What nationality were Adam and Eve? During the Saliesco era in Romania, there was this grimly humorous joke that went around.
Oh, yeah. How'd it go?
It went Romanians, of course. They went naked, they were hungry, and if they wanted to eat, well, they had to steal apples, yet they knew they were living in paradise.
Wow. That's that's dark, but sharp.
Exactly. It's a dark chuckle, right?
Yeah.
But it perfectly expresses the characteristics of that whole era.
Mm-hmm.
The chauvinism, the pervasive shrewdness people needed just to survive, and the sheer absurdity of the official propaganda.
Yeah, you can feel it all in there.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into this really fascinating, complex, and often contradictory story of communism in Arad, Romania.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be drawing from a great stack of sources. There's a chapter by Munson and Tibor in the book In the Labyrinth of Hope, some historical census data, economic analyses, and some really vivid personal anecdotes, too.
Yeah, and our mission really is to try and get beyond those, official narratives and the carefully constructed propaganda
Right.
to truly understand what life was actually like under the communist regime, how it impacted the city's population, the economy, the industry, the whole fabric of the place.
And maybe uncover some surprising facts.
Hopefully. And maybe a few aha moments about a period that, let's face it, is still often misunderstood.
Okay, so that Adam and Eve joke you mentioned. It's so darkly funny, but it really does set the scene. Can we dig into that a bit? What makes it such a perfect, maybe absurd mirror of the time?
Yeah.
Especially that blend of chauvinism and the necessary shrewdness, as the source calls it.
It's a really crucial starting point, I think, because it leads us straight into how a regime that, projected this image of a worker's paradise, how it used propaganda to manage what people thought, even when it became completely absurd.
Right.
The joke just highlights how people had to navigate that contradiction every single day. It's sort of a deep-seated coping mechanism, finding that dark humor, finding a shred of truth in a world full of official lies.
And our sources share another really striking personal memory. This one's from childhood vacations in Lipova.
Okay.
Imagine this. Soldiers selling apples. Apples that were, quote, much nicer than the ones in the stores at a very low price.
Huh. Soldiers selling apples.
Yeah. What does that tell us about the everyday economy, where even basic stuff was hard to get?
Oh, it's incredibly telling, isn't it? It just screams desperation, really, where you couldn't find basic necessities through the official shops.
So the legality...
Questionable.
Questionable is putting it mildly. But, in that era, the black market, these informal exchanges, that was often how you survived. It really highlights that shrewdness we talked about, people just finding ways.
Right.
And speaking of things appearing and disappearing, there's another powerful memory from Lipova in the sources.
What's that?
A time-worn stone pillar. It commemorated the spa resort's founder, and it was inscribed in Hungarian. It was there one year, gone the next. And not like carefully removed, just destroyed, smashed into rubble.
Wow. Just like that. Just like that. It tells you so much about the regime's chilling approach to cultural identity, to history, just erasing anything that didn't fit the narrative. A kind of brutal directness.
So we've got these sort of small, unsettling details, the apples, the smashed pillar, reflecting daily life and cultural erasure. But how did that translate to the bigger picture, like the population itself?
Yeah, the demographics.
Our sources point out it's actually really challenging to understand the true demographic picture. Apparently, the population was only officially counted 3 times under communism.
Only 3 times. That's not a lot.
Right. And the first one, 1948, was apparently unusually fast, driven by economic needs. It even included mother tongues. But get this, the data was reportedly destroyed in a fire.
Destroyed in a fire?
Right.
How convenient.
Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it?
It really does. And digging into that data, or what's left of it, is fascinating because the numbers themselves become a kind of lens on the political climate.
Oh, so?
Well, for instance, the 1956 data that's generally seen as being, closest to the actual situation.
Yeah.
But then you look at the 1966 census, right at the start of the Ceausescu era. And the data for the Hungarian minority already shows, significant distortion.
Distortion? Like how?
Like, it presents this contradictory picture.
Sorry.
A decrease of 2,000 people by mother tongue, but a huge drop of 32,000 by ethnicity in just 10 years.
Wait, 32,000? That doesn't add up.
Exactly. It's a stark discrepancy. It makes it pretty clear how statistics were being manipulated for political aims, bending reality to fit the regime's story.
And if we look at the population growth across cities, Arad, Timisoara, Oradia from, say, 1930 to 1992, you can really see Timisoara consistently pulling ahead.
Yeah, Timisoara definitely boomed.
Arad grew faster than Oradia at first, up until 56. But then Oradia overtook Arad by 1992, became the, what does the source call it, the Paris on the banks of the PA.
Oh, right. It really shows how much administrative decisions mattered, how they could shape a city's destiny.
Absolutely.
Arad had some major setbacks early on, losing parts of its area like Savava in 48 and Sonacolmike in 50.
Right.
But the really big blow was 1956, when Ereğli was divided off. That effectively demoted Arad from a regional center to just a district residence.
Just a district town.
Yeah. And our sources argue pretty strongly that this decision stunted our development for decades, made it really hard to keep up with Timisoara and Oradia, which were allowed to grow.
It's interesting because Caiuscu himself explained urbanization as this, natural process.
Right.
People moving from the countryside to the city because of industrialization.
Right, the official line.
But the sources cite a historian, George Leandros, who totally pushes back on that. He argues that the crazy record pace of urbanization in the 80s wasn't about organic growth. It served primarily the prestige of power.
Exactly. It was about appearances, about projecting strength. And this political agenda around urbanization had real impacts, especially for minorities.
How so?
Well, look at those bar graphs in the sources, comparing Romanians, Hungarians, Germans in the three cities from 48 to 92. The trend is just striking. As the total population grows, the proportion of Hungarians consistently drops.
So fewer Hungarians relative to the total.
Significantly fewer. Like, Romanians increase maybe fivefold in Timisoara and Oradea, but only triple in Arad.
Okay.
But for Hungarians, in Oradea, they increase by about 30%. Timisoara, only 3%. But in Arad, they decrease by 20% by 1992.
A 20% decrease?
Yeah.
Wow. That's not just a demographic shift, is it?
No, it's a whole complex social transformation.
And the sources try to explain this decline among Hungarians.
Yeah.
Talking about socio-psychological factors.
Right. Semlian Istvan's analysis.
Yeah, he points to the fertility behavior of Hungarians and the fact that they became an urban nationality earlier than many Romanians migrating to cities.
So the idea is that Romanian migrants moving to cities might still have larger families for a while.
Exactly. Whereas Hungarians, already more urbanized and integrated into city life, didn't get that same sort of temporary population advantage.
It's complex, and if you connect that to the bigger political picture, the historian Lucian Boya describes this really dramatic, almost paradoxical shift.
Paradoxical.
Well, in the very early years of communism, minorities, especially Jews and Hungarians, actually had quite a bit of influence in the party leadership.
Really? Like Anna Pacher?
Exactly. Figures like Pacher, Luca Laszlo, alongside Gero Gide. It created this weird sort of utopia of cultural freedom, like setting up the Hungarian autonomous region, all while the state itself was becoming incredibly cruel underneath.
A strange contradiction.
Very strange.
Yeah.
But then, after 1952, there's this gradual change of direction. It slowly builds until you get to the most nationalistic communism under Ceausescu.
Which meant things like?
Well, the administrative reform of 1968, which got rid of the Hungarian autonomous region, and those really chauvinistic July theses in 1971, all openly pushing for this homogenous socialist nation.
And this nationalism wasn't just internal, right? It spilled over into international relations.
Oh, absolutely. Like that 1982 book, A Word About Transylvania by Ion Longchenja.
I've heard of that. It caused quite a stir.
It really did. Openly criticized what it saw as permissive Hungarian policy towards minorities. It even led to a Hungarian deputy prime minister, Fazekas János, being forced to retire just for criticizing the pamphlet. Apparently, Elena Ceausescu insisted.
Wow. That's direct interference.
It really was. And the absolute low point for Hungarian-Romanian relations then was probably that Ceausescu-Gross-Caroly meeting in Arad in 1988.
Right, against the backdrop of the systematization plan.
Exactly. The village demolitions, the reshaping of cities. Budapest was protesting loudly. But Hungarian diplomacy just suffered this unprecedented defeat.
Oh, I haven't.
Gross basically just capitulated to Ceausescu's view. It was a huge disappointment for the Arad Hungarians who lined the streets hoping for something from the Hungarian delegation, and they got nothing, just saw their hopes dash.
That's rough. And even something like the commemoration of October 6th for the Arad martyrs.
Yeah.
That changed over time, too.
Yeah, it's like a yardstick for the shifting mood. In 1948, it was the celebratory feast, all about socialist brotherhood. The graves were venerated. By 1956, there was talk of restoring the memorial statue, But it wasn't actually put back up for public view until 1999.
Almost 45 years later.
Exactly. It makes you think, doesn't it? What does it mean when history gets selectively remembered or just suppressed?
Yeah.
The 120th anniversary in 1969, a tiny invite-only event, then basically a period of deafening silence about the martyrs.
Until after the revolution.
Right. Then look at 1990, boom, almost 10,000 people turn out to honor the martyrs. Huge contrast.
Right.
But what's really striking is that the Romanian side was not represented even at the local level.
Still not represented, even in 1990.
Even then, that silence speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the divisions, the unresolved tensions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears a bit now to the economic reality under communism.
Right.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn, having lived through the Soviet camps, he described the communist figure as a harmful and dangerous type of man. Cynical, unscrupulous, anti-cultural, lacking shame.
Pretty strong words.
Very strong, maybe too trenchant, as our source says, for everyone. But the source also suggests there are fragments of truth in it, especially when looking at the system's flaws.
And what becomes chillingly clear, I think, is how the ideology's basic view of people just reducing them to material beings became its own downfall. Its Achilles heel.
How so?
Because it meant this relentless, almost religious focus on heavy industry, building machines to build more machines. Its precursor, the machine industry.
Right. Well, basic needs.
Severely neglected. Food shortages, lack of consumer goods. This wasn't just bad economics, it was a fundamental miscalculation about what people need, what society needs. A system built on abstract production targets that ended up alienating the very people it claimed to serve. It sowed the seeds of its own collapse, really.
And you really see that focus reflected in education, don't you? The sources had this startling statistic.
Oh, the engineering one.
Yeah. In 1988-89, get this, more than two-thirds of Romanian students, 68.8%, were studying engineering.
An absolute world record. It's astonishing, isn't it?
It really is. Why such an intense focus?
It just reflects that relentless drive for heavy industrialization, prioritizing machines, infrastructure, steel, tractors, factories, above everything else. The belief was that if you maximize that, the country would prosper.
So they funneled all the brainpower into one area.
Pretty much, into one narrow channel, at the expense of other vital fields, and ultimately at the expense of a balanced economy that could actually meet people's needs.
And despite the official line, no privileged counties getting central investment.
Yeah, right.
The data for 65, 75, 85 tells a very different story for Arad. It consistently got much less than our population, and therefore our area would have justified.
The disparity is really revealing when you break it down. Neighboring counties like Bihor and Timea got more funds pretty much across the board.
So Arad lagged behind.
Significantly.
Yeah.
Industrial investment was lower. And construction, the figures are just shockingly low, like 0.07%, 0.44%, 0.24% in those years. Less than 0.5%.
Wow. That's practically nothing.
It's tiny. Even in things like health and education, human resources, Arad was falling behind. The conclusion is pretty stark. Savings were being made at the expense of our future. It wasn't just a blip. It was systemic disadvantage.
And nationally, the picture's even starker. In 89, what was it? 37.7% of investment in heavy industry, category A.
Right, and only 6%, just 6, in consumer goods, category B.
Now, the West, including Arad, did slightly better on consumer goods, 11.72%.
A bit better, yeah. But it still makes you wonder how much of that actually made it into the shops, given the constant shortages everyone remembers.
True. It's clear the whole economic system created this really strange, distorted reality.
Absolutely. So maybe let's look at some snapshots from Arad's actual factories. See how these big plans played out on the ground.
Yeah, let's do that. Start with the furniture factory, the old Lengyel company.
Ah, yes, famous ones.
Before communism, supplied royal courts, exported globally. But our sources say by 2020, puddles are growing freely where one of the country's most famous factories once stood.
That's such a powerful image of decay, isn't it?
It really is.
But what's fascinating is that incredible craftsmanship still existed there, even under communism. There's an account from a 1971 visit describing workers like Condor Lajos and Lix Yosef making this ingenious construction for tables. And this guy, Ferenc Shenkula, ensuring absolute precision, making sure every box had exactly the right parts for a specific cabinet.
So the skill was still there.
The skill persisted. And there's that intriguing anecdote about a really famous piece of furniture, apparently made for Sciescu's birthday, that later sold for only 50,000 euros after he died. It just shows that mix, doesn't doesn't it? Enduring skill, but within this totally dysfunctional market where value is just obscure.
Then you had the wagon factory, started way back in 1891, later renamed after Georgy Dimitrov. Real
It's
powerhouse.
huge output, yeah. 30% of the city's industrial production in 1970.
Made trains for the Bucharest Metro, exported thousands of wagons worldwide.
And this place really shows that it wasn't all, primitive tech under communism. There's an article from '85 by an engineer, Kis Akos.
What did it say?
He highlighted world-class stuff happening there, like CO2 welding, spot welding, achieving results similar to those obtained in U.S. factories.
Really? Comparable to U.S. factories.
According to him, yes. It underlines that there were these surprising pockets of real technological advancement within the system.
Okay, what about the Laves factory? Named after Iosif Ranjay, Ceausescu visited 7 times.
7 times. Clearly important. And the sources say it produced more and more modern CNC machines, computer numerical control.
So keeping up with technology.
Trying to. It's compelling how they adapted, like the story of the SN 1250 lathe.
What about it?
It was apparently a copy of a Swiss lathe, but they successfully sold it to China. That shows real drive.
Yeah, and the rumors.
Ah, yes, the bad mouths, as the source puts it, whispering about them dismantling foreign cars to copy them. Who knows if that's true, but...
Adds to the picture.
It does, but then there's that unforgettable story about the Arad engineers sent to China because a lathe got damaged.
Oh, I remember reading that. What happened?
They were publicly shamed
Yeah.
and then immediately marched to the airport. Their suitcases were already packed, even the cigarette butts in the ashtrays, the source says.
No way. That's incredible.
It's such a vivid picture, isn't it? The political pressure, the demand for perfection, the complete lack of grace when things went wrong.
Definitely paints a picture.
Yeah.
Okay, moving to textiles. Tiba, Truco Royo, UTA. The big names in Arad.
Strongholds of light industry, though light maybe wasn't the word for the work itself.
No, sounds intense. The sources quote, The Working Woman magazine, tracing a worker, Pusbuk de Sofia,
Right.
who apparently runs about 10 kilometers every shift for maybe 2,800, 3,000 lei. And no vacations because, quote, the garden, the birds, the pigs are waiting for her.
That quote just perfectly captures the gap, doesn't it, between the official praise and the hard reality of daily life.
Absolutely. And while Tricol Royu was exporting 80% of its stuff globally,
Impressive on paper.
the same source reveals that in 1980, Tiba had a huge deficit, nearly 380,000 lei because of organized theft, described as a systemic practice.
Systemic theft. So it wasn't just isolated incidents. It shows this widespread breakdown of trust, of legality, right inside the system, a constant battle against internal problems.
And then there's the Aranka doll factory. That sounds quite unique.
A real gem, yeah. Making $1.7 million a year, including that replica of Nadia Comaneci.
The gymnast. I remember those dolls.
Yeah.
And they even secretly tested kids to see what sparked their imagination.
Such a lovely detail, isn't it? That focus on imagination.
Yeah.
But if you connect it back to the realities of communist trade, there's an account from London in 1988.
Okay.
It highlights this classic systemic flaw. The dolls themselves, impeccable quality, great aesthetics, but the packaging, unattractive.
So the product was good, but the presentation let it down.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates a system obsessed with production numbers, but clueless about marketing, presentation, basic consumer appeal, just this constant disconnect.
And the Liberté shoe factory, that really shows the workers' struggles, doesn't it?
Yeah, that story is tough.
A poet writing for The Working Woman describes workers suffocating in the heat, working with acetone, no proper ventilation, and they kept asking for just one fan, an 8,000 lei fan. But management's reply, always the same. No money, there's no investment fund allocated.
For years, right, just denied a basic fan. How could that happen? How could a factory, mostly employing women, be denied something so fundamental for so
Just
long?
no investment fund?
It wasn't about whether the factory itself could afford it. It was about the central plant's priorities. And clearly, basic worker welfare, even ventilation, wasn't high on the list. The lack of toilets, proper sanitary units, it underlines the systemic disregard.
Grim. Okay, finally, the watch factory. Przitzia, later called Victoria.
Romania's first, and for a long time, only watch factory.
By 89, 1,300 employees, making 1 million watches a year. But then the government moved wristwatch production to Bucharest.
Yeah, Orarax in Bucharest got wristwatches. Arad was limited to alarm clocks and wall clocks. Central planning again.
But the craftsmanship there,
Oh, yeah.
there was pride, right?
No, absolutely. There's a story about a chief engineer on a trip to Japan.
What happened?
He reported back that the Japanese specialists were really impressed with the Arad engineers, said they learned new machines faster than famous American technicians.
Wow, high praise.
Definitely speaks to individual talent, but that contrasts sharply with the reality, the not all milk and honey, as the source says.
Like the mysterious wall clock.
Oh, yeah, that humorous article about a cheap kitchen clock meant to run for days, maybe weeks, but it only ran for 8.5 hours.
Typical.
And in Arad itself, despite having these watch factories, the public clocks were notorious, never working or showing completely different times, made the city look a little like Yokai Moore's Castle of Learning, sort of disjointed.
It's funny, but it points to something deeper, doesn't it? That inconsistency.
Exactly. That sort of inefficiency in public services, it signals a wider systemic breakdown. Even basic infrastructure suffered.
But amidst all that, the industrial clockworks play this pivotal role in the '89 revolution.
Totally unexpected, right?
They really.
Absolutely pivotal. December 21st, 1989, young workers there just refused to start work.
They just stopped.
Yep. Marched out and called on workers from the machine tools factory, the wagon factory, UTA Textiles, others to join them.
And did they?
Many did. Many answered the call. It just shows, doesn't it? Even in a system that seems totally controlled, totally apathetic, that spark of dissent, fueled by all those everyday frustrations we've talked about, it could ignite and lead to huge change.
Incredible. So fast forward, less than a decade after the regime falls, most of these huge factories we've talked about, the furniture place, the distillery, others, they're bankrupt or close to it, they just collapsed like a house of cards.
Yeah, the aftermath was brutal for industry.
Looking back now, was it all worth it? That whole industrial push?
That's the huge question, isn't it? And the sources offer a really complex mix of reasons for the collapse.
Like what?
Well, they talk about the predatory economy of privatization that came after '89, the invasion of cheap Chinese products. And there's even this accusation that Western companies have systematically eliminated their competitors from Central and Eastern Europe.
A lot of factors.
Definitely. No simple answer.
But our deep dive ends on this really powerful, kind of provocative thought.
Yeah.
Maybe what those companies ultimately lacked most after communism wasn't just money, wasn't just capital, but the people who'd once owned them, nurtured them.
That's a really interesting point. The sources suggest that communism destroyed the talented bourgeoisie that drove our city's economy.
Not just the owners, but the skilled professionals, too.
Exactly. The disappearance of those old-fashioned, competent professionals like that guy, Arad from the watch factory. His innovations never even got looked at by the technical office, just disposed of operationally, lost to bureaucracy.
It's a waste.
A huge waste. And it leaves us with this big question, especially now as we move into this era of, modular sheet metal factories, more automation, more robotization everywhere.
Right.
What happens to skill, to local ownership, to the actual spirit of industry in places like Arad, and maybe, now broadly, what does this mean for your future as industries all over the world face these kinds of massive shifts?